Hello there, folks. This is Jay Frost. And of course, this is Command Central for the Philanthropy Mastermind series, where today you are at the How to Raise show. So, welcome. It's really great to have you here. And I can see already that you all are warming up the chat, which we really love. A big shout out to all of you there. I'm going to open that up so I can see some of your names as they appear. And it does look like you're really taking this to heart. I really appreciate it. So, Michelle and Noreen, Evangelina, Hallie, Meg, Joan, Veronica, Mary, et cetera, et cetera. We really appreciate seeing all of you here. Jillian from Birmingham, that's really nice to see, as well as the folks at Art Prize. It's been a while since I've been up there. That's a wonderful program you have. So lots of great people in the room and more, I'm sure, entering right now as we speak. It's great to have you here for the session today. And I want to encourage you to continue using that because today will be very interactive. Instead of foisting a lot of slides on you, I know what we're going to do is essentially have a conversation with our guest about a topic that really matters. And so for that to be truly engaging, we would love to have you be a part of it. So please do feel free to use the Q&A, but especially the chat so we can make sure you're a part of everything we discuss. Since we can't see or hear you, that's the next best thing. Now, what is today all about? It's a How to Raise session, as I said, on Future Givers Now, engaging Gen Z and Millennials in modern fundraising. It's probably why you're here, but if it's a surprise, then I'm sure you will not be disappointed. We'll be joined, of course, by my friend and colleague, Genesis Medense, who's the Regional Account Executive at DonorSearch. She has a very strong background in nonprofit development, including more than 5 years at Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. She brings deep expertise in donor engagement, campaign strategy, and leveraging data to drive fundraising success. She's also been active, even very recently, as a state lead with American Cancer Society's Action Network in Maryland, among other things. And I'm sure all that will be woven into some of what she will be sharing with you today, both in what she delivers, but also in the questions and dialogue she has with you. What are we going to explore? How fundraisers can build lasting connections with Gen Z and millennial donors. I know those are two really big demographics. There's a lot going on in there. She's going to really divide that up for us a little bit and help us understand it. So we'll know better what motivates next gen givers and how we can meet them where they are, whether it's TikTok campaigns, youth advisory boards, lots of different stuff that we can do. And I want to make sure not only that you will engage with us in terms of the chat and the Q&A throughout, but also that you know that we will be recording this and we will share it with you. So if you're here with us live, we'll be making a recording and you'll receive an email from us in the next 48 hours or so with a link to this recording so you can share it with colleagues who need to be a part of this as well, but just couldn't be with us live. And you also will be happy to know that other topics we've had throughout this series, which goes back to 2016, are also available for you at the site of our sponsor, DonorSearch. And you'll find, in fact, recordings of, I think, all of our content over the last 2 years under the resources tab. So take a look there for all of that. Now let's jump into this, shall we? So I want to welcome, of course, Genesis to the stage. Genesis, come up here and say hello.
Hi, and hello to everyone who's joined today's call. So excited to be back on Masterminds. I think this is my second time on, but it's been maybe 2 years since. So
it has been about 2 years, so it's long overdue. And but you're still in this demographic. You know, nothing has changed. 2 years doesn't really change any of this. You're you're feeling the pulse not only of what you know personally, but what you work with professionally. So I know that you'll have a lot to offer us today on this, but we've also seen a lot of change in terms of what's been happening with these demographics over the last few years as we've rolled out of COVID. So that's not something I know we advertise in advance, but maybe it's something we can discuss as we try to figure out how to engage with people and meet them where they are, since where they are has changed. Maybe we can start with the very beginning. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about mindset.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think many fundraisers and even those that are working on the development side, on the tech side, maybe asking themselves, like, how could I further expand youth engagement or that next generation donor? And really asking yourself, what is a next generation donor, right? You may have a certain donor base now that you're highly focused on, whether that's because of specific wealth markers that you know about them, specific relationships to the organization, to the mission, and even to your professional career. They may be donors that may have been following you around for a few years now. But really understanding this younger demographic of Gen Z and millennials is important. To your point, Jay, that just the last 5 years have shown tremendous differences in the way that people are moving. And, we need to understand what innovative approaches can help build a sustainable donor base today, right? We're not looking at the same donor base that we were looking at 5 or 6 years ago. So really want to further explore these topics and hopefully provide some valuable insight and strategies, not just from what I've read, from what I know, and obviously, Jay, from what you know, but also from the chat, right? So you all are on the front lines today. You're having these one-on-one conversations and experiences and interactions on social media and whatnot. So please feel free to chime in along today's call and give us some additional input. I'm sure it's going to be very valuable. So something that I wanted to start off with first is really the values of Gen Z and millennials, and really focus on that demographic specifically because what their values are is around purpose, transparency, and impact, right? It's not just about charity. It's about being a part of a community movement. It's about activism, but we're allowing them to do it in a way that it isn't controversial, but rather heartfelt. And I think that impact has to be tangible. It can't always be a thank you video or a gift, right? Show them, invite them to your hub or to your cancer center or to your work site, right? Give them a reason to continue sharing their efforts with the world, right? And that power that Gen Z specifically has on social media is beyond anyone's understanding right now. And so we really want to just hone in on that part, right? Hone in on how are you allowing your younger donors to feel purposeful and to make their gifts more impactful.
As you were talking about that, I realized we probably would benefit from knowing the demographics of our audience too. Do you mind if I do a little inventory?
Oh, I wouldn't mind at all.
And you can also help us by defining these things a little bit. So when you think about Gen Z, or what are you talking about in terms of years?
So Gen Z, really anyone from like 1997 to now, and then millennials 96 and over.
96 and over. And so if
that's my definition, I'm sure everyone has a little bit of a different one.
Well, it is kind of a moving target on some of these things, but these are largely marketing definitions. I think the only thing that's really a classification the government used to use is the boomers, because it had to do with the baby boom after 1946. So the rest of this is a moving target, but you've given us a date to work with. So maybe we can ask you in the live audience, if you wouldn't mind sharing which demographic you're in. So there we go. So 1995, or you can even do it by whether you're Gen Z or millennial, if you'd like to do that. Millennial, Gen X. Okay, yes, there are always going to be some Gen Xers here. So Gen Z, we've got some boomers, millennials, a bunch of Gen X's, and millennials. And don't know where you fit. 1983, where would that fit? Help me with the math, Genesis.
Millennial.
Yes,
right?
yes,
millennial.
Okay. Ooh, exillennial. Now you're really stretching my marketing terminology here. Yes, we've got an early Gen Z, 1997, absolutely. So thank you all for that. It might also be helpful to know if you are working with Gen Z or millennials in your fundraising work. So if you'd like to say something about that, that would be another helpful kind of frame for some of what Genesis is going to share with us today. So
they're really good facts to know.
Not specifically yet. Okay. A lot of millennials. I guess that figures. Millennials have become this huge demographic for us in fundraising, haven't they?
So much going on in the chat. No, I love it.
Small organization here, both millennials in the office. Yes, it looks like we are definitely seeing a cross section in the audience, both of who's here representing these organizations, but also who they are interacting with. About to be 3 millennials outnumbering. I like that. And maybe we're going to start to see some questions in a minute. As we're thinking about this, you were just talking about the issue about the values of these different demographics. What has been the major difference, perhaps, between, let's say, Gen Z and the millennials in terms of maybe value systems, how they interact with us?
Say probably the most notable difference between the generations is really that the younger folks on the younger end of the scale are almost always cause first, not organization first. And more traditional models and more traditional donors, where we see a lot more millennials, we see that they're much more loyal to a specific organization or a specific mission. And that's what we see evolving. And that's, maybe something that should be a focus on for fundraisers, right? How do you evolve that traditional donor model that you are used to with millennials and with boomers, right? I think as a fundraiser and as a professional in the field, we need to figure out what that means for your specific position and for your organization.
And then I know that because of the work you did, especially not only now, but also with leukemia and lymphoma, that you saw differences there between those demographics and the boomers, who have been such a big part of our life from the board level through major donors. What's maybe one of the big differences there?
I think it's the way that we are evolving. Like peer-to-peer fundraising is evolving. 5-10 years ago, yes, we were fundraising through social media. You're fundraising through different platforms now, but the accessibility to certain apps or to certain features within your social media platforms is constantly changing. There's always something new. I think peer-to-peer fundraising is clearly at the top of that list. But that doesn't mean you need to limit your team to the opportunities that you're used to, right? So if you're normally securing your major gifts through board members or VIPs, cool, that's fine, right? That's the traditional way of doing things. But just because the specific donors reaching out to their network and their peer-to-peer fundraising efforts doesn't mean that you don't have those 25,000 or $1 million opportunities within that, right? And so don't want to kind of go off and into another conversation, but so many cuts have been made to staffs, right? There's so much turnover in the philanthropic space, and people think that AI is replacing humans at work, but that doesn't actually justify why nonprofits aren't calling for more hiring. They should. And I say this because there's never a team that's big enough to cultivate the relationships with all the right donors, right? There's always money left at the table at the end of the fiscal year, and there's simply not enough time for a team of 1 or 2 or 3 staff members to do all the outreach and stewardship that's needed. And I think instead of pushing that narrative of less people on your teams or in the office, it should be the opposite, right? I think your teams can learn to engage in meaningful ways with these younger generations. And it takes time to understand what they're interested in, and whether they're speaking on a podcast or they're on Instagram Live or they're on a streaming platform. This is where they're sourcing their news and their efforts to, right? And that is a shift. That's the way that peer-to-peer fundraising is evolving. But if our teams aren't evolving in the same way, then there's a huge, huge miss on opportunities there.
Right. Well, I know one of the things is just knowing who the donors are. So if we don't know where they fit and how they want to fit with us, then it might be hard to even figure out, are we talking to people on this platform or this platform? Are we going to hold a special live event? Are we going to do something that's digital? What are some of the ways that organizations can make those decisions?
That's a great question. Invest in a prospecting tool like DonorSearch. But no, being more engaged on social media, but in a way that's meaningful. I think people are used to engaging in social media on a personal level, right? Sharing with their friends and family their life updates and photos and their dogs. But making the time for it, I know it sounds so ridiculous, but making the time to actually sit down for a half hour, an hour, and learn what the different features are within those social media platforms, right? Like, how can your team benefit from doing an Instagram Live? Do you share your Instagram with or the organization's Instagram or Facebook with your current donors or prospects, right? So that they can further understand how to do that. And so, sorry, Jay, my screen went a little black, but you can still hear me, right?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Okay. Okay. And I think in that sense, identifying your donors ahead of time via your data, right? Doing the proper analysis needed is always going to be very important. Um, Someone who currently works at DonorSearch as an account executive, I can't tell you how many people come to us and they're like, I already know my donor base. I know who's going to give this year. I know what they're capable of, et cetera, et cetera. That's all true. But two things can also be true, right? And that second thing is that there's always more to know about a specific donor. Um, and it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to make the investment into technology that allows you to find those answers in a much more efficient manner. And I think when you're able to make the time to do that research and do that analysis and then shift into what is currently working, which is, social media platforms, I think you're going to get much better results, more than you're probably expecting.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking about that, I thought also there's a really old line. It's that you never step into the same river twice. So if we're looking at our database 5 years ago, and forget the database for a minute, we're looking around a room of people who attended an event 5 years ago. If we held the same event today, it's not going to be all the same people, right? I mean, if so, then we have a rapidly aging population, and we love those people, but then we're missing other people. So things are always changing. I guess we have to keep up to date on that, whether it's through digital tools or the kind of personal engagement that we're and entertaining. So maybe that's a good segue into digital engagement. You were kind of alluding to it. You were listing some of the different tools that people use. Can you take us through some of the tools that you think are particularly relevant for different generations, but also maybe for different purposes? The ones that you think are the most effective, but maybe even less effective ones as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segment into knowing that we are in this digital first fundraising era. And what does that mean, right? You want to meet your donors where they are. Um, you're lacking the time, the bandwidth, the team to do all the things that you maybe want to do or want to explore. And so instead of, identifying the millions of problems or obstacles in your way, identify a solution, right? So if you are interested in um, making your videos go viral quickly, go on TikTok, right? Go on TikTok, understand what the right hashtags are going to be, share them with the right people so that that is in a video that will gather larger engagement, right? If you're hoping to do fundraising directly through your social media platforms and sharing more heartfelt stories about the mission, about other personal stories, go to Instagram, right? And I think that's just where the younger generations are focusing so much of their time and attention on. I think within those platforms, there's this whole world of influencers and marketing. They share their causes through different streaming platforms and games, and it's so absurd just how many options are available out there, right? And they're not for everyone, right? I'm not telling you to go on all 10 social media platforms today and try them out. Um, but certainly follow the ones that you are most comfortable with, right? Um, it's a piece of technology. It's always going to be elaborate. It's always going to be updated. There's always a change that's going to come. So you can't get too comfortable either. And so I would say TikTok and Instagram for those two reasons. I think if you're still trying to reach millennials, you can't stray away from LinkedIn. I mean, people are just absolutely obsessed with with LinkedIn in a way that is that's purposeful, right? Not just to um, tap themselves on the back for their hard work, but for getting a message across, right? And I think millennials do an amazing job at cheering each other on. They're each other's biggest fans. And you notice that within the posts that they make, the shout outs that they give to each other, the likes, the shares, and comments that they get on their posts. And that's important, right? Because if you are focused on a specific donor or specific board members at your organization to get the message out, you want to make sure that the message that they are putting out is a message that is going to be very impactful, right? With those looking at that social media.
You were talking about first the visual, the videos, and there are videos on LinkedIn as well, and increasingly so. But for people who are thinking about TikTok and Instagram Reels and so forth, what are the principal advantages and disadvantages of those platforms? And I'd be interested also to know from people in the audience if you are using these things, specifically TikTok, both because of the controversy involving TikTok and the discussions about banning it in the United States, but also just because it has skewed so young. I think it was the chief platform for people under 24, but it's also now one of the largest social platforms in the world. So if you use TikTok, I'd love to know that. You can just tell us that in the chat. And by that, I mean, do you use it personally and do you use it for your organization? I think that would be very important to know. So can you help us understand the difference between TikTok and Instagram and maybe how those things are similar but not the same?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then also for the chat, I'd love to also know if at your organization, if you're using either social media platform, if you specifically are the person making the post or creating the content, or if you have a dedicated marketing team that does that. That's also very important to know within your organization because of just bandwidth and know-how of the platforms, right? I think with TikTok, right, it's a video-based platform, right, where you're going to create reels and they can be edited a million different ways. Um, the the way that you reach an audience on TikTok is much different than how you reach one on Instagram. TikTok is much open. Yes, you can have followers on TikTok, but by simply being a part of someone's algorithm by putting in the right hashtags, you get to reach so many more people at a lightning speed. Whereas on Instagram, right, your feed is limited to those that follow you, right? If you open up your Instagram to a public account where you're putting in the right hashtags, yes, you will reach people, but that's just not, and any younger generations on the chat can chime in. Very, very little do people on Instagram go and click on the hashtags and then scroll through a feed of everything else included in that hashtag. It just happens more on TikTok when you're trying to find a specific topic, right? So I think TikTok works in a way that almost like X, Twitter, right? Where you can just put in a keyword and it just populates every video, right? That has that type of association. So that's what I mean. I mean, just the speed at which people can get a specific answer is insane.
And we are getting some great responses in the chat on this.
All right,
So
let's
for
see.
those who get the recording later, I'll just touch on a couple. People saying that they some of them use TikTok, but it doesn't sound like institutionally. Let me see, just started using TikTok, so we're building our follower base, and we use Instagram frequently. Communications department handles the socials, and that's something I keep hearing too. This is managed by marketing, says another, and so forth. Dedicated team handling all the social media channels, marketing consultant doing the posts. So I think that that's fairly constant, that there's been
Yes.
historically the advancement or development or fundraising team, because we're called by various names for different purposes over here, and then a marketing team that is handling the social. Is this something that you still run into, Genesis, that division?
Yeah, that division is still there. A few comments there. I think when there's that division between the marketing team and then the actual fundraisers or development staff, right, that are trying to create content, there's a different level of know-how there, right? Obviously, the marketing team will be up to date on what's going on. They'll know how to create specific content. The time that it takes them to do that will be a lot quicker, right? I think as fundraisers and as professionals, right? Not saying you have to go out and make content. That's not what I'm saying at all. Just better understand it, right? Better understand what people are interested in viewing and posting about, reading, etc. Right? And that's something that you can take to your marketing team. If you have a marketing team, if you have that asset, right, of a marketing team, you can always, you can come to them once a week, once a month, and be like, hey, I saw something like this. I think we could recreate it in a way that makes sense for us. Don't limit yourself to what your team has done in the past at all. If you're used to putting out 3 pages of collateral on what your mission is every year, maybe it's time to change that. Maybe your collateral can be a digital piece, whether that's a reel or a video, right? And that's just a bit more engaging.
We have a comment here, kind of echoes part of what you were saying about need better cross-department collaboration when engaging audience, making asks, telling stories, and developing a message through line, which is maybe the point. If there's coordination, it doesn't mean necessarily that person A has to do what person B does, but it might mean that if everybody's kind of communicating on the same message, we can use our vehicles, our own work process in order to support that message. And that might be TikTok over here, and it might be LinkedIn over there, both to address different audiences, but within that remaining consistent in our messaging. And then we did have a question from Jillian about, can you address how to use social media metrics to define success? I don't know if that's something you're prepared to do right now, but I've seen some friction between making posts for the purpose of sharing information, membership drives, events, etc., versus posts that are more geared towards growing social media engagement numbers. Do you have thoughts on this about the metrics towards some kind of success, especially if it's a fundraising success measurement, versus growing just social media metrics in general?
Yeah, maybe just one or two, right? Nothing too grand. I think when you're trying to grow social media engagement numbers, right, you want just more people to view your content, right? And to you, that may mean one thing, to another organization, that may mean another thing. Engagement simply means that people have seen your content, right? But there's also different metrics within engagement, right? Are they clicking on an email? Are they clicking on a link? Are they clicking on a video? Are they actually watching the video? How much time do they spend on the email that you sent them, or the link that you shared on social media? All those things can be tracked, right? That is not always the easiest thing. I understand in a lot of cases that takes an extra tool, right, to do that sort of tracking, and it can be an additional investment for your team. But in terms of metrics that can define better success for your team, I think links for registration are great. I think for the purposes of sharing information, membership drives, etc. You don't maybe want to post all the information, right? Everything that is so valuable, or maybe certain numbers or pricing, etc., directly on social media, but at least provide a link, right? Provide a link to register or a link to learn more. And that is a way that you can directly engage with that individual after the fact. I would say people are not a fan of long registration forms. Like, don't ask them for their address off the bat. It doesn't make any sense, right? When they're just on social media trying to learn more about a specific topic. So name, email, call it a day. I think that's a great way to figure out who is visiting your social media that can become a much more defined prospect or potential donor for you.
Right. And I guess that's also a way to kind of track performance, back to the point that Jillian's making, because if clicks are one thing, eyeballs are one thing, but if you're able to capture email addresses or get people to download a link from a landing page on Facebook or something of the equivalent of that, now you have an asset yourself. You have a way of contacting that person and developing that relationship over time. Plus, I guess you can also, from the email address, oftentimes then use that information to find the demographic data, which will help you to offer opportunities for engagement that are appropriate for that person. Let me see. Can you also ask, Sarah asks, can you also ask what generation they are part of on registration? So what's your thought on that? Because that isn't like asking for an address. Is that too high a barrier?
Well, you're not, I guess that's interesting. It's a different way of asking for age or date of birth, right? I think that may come off weird, putting in like an age or date of birth when you're just trying to click on a learn more type of registration link. But asking for what generation you're in, I think that's actually kind of clever. I think that, like, if I were to see that, or I know if some of my colleagues or friends were to see that, they'd be like, oh, okay, I'm probably going to be connected to someone who is more insightful into my knowledge, into my wants and my needs and my et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Versus me personally being connected to someone who is 75. They're probably going to connect me to someone who's on the lower scale of age. It's a very clever way to go about it.
I think so too. And now Cindy points out that many people don't know their generation. I guess there's a way that that could be a pop-up. I don't know
Yeah,
how you feel about pop-ups, but if you're adding value by saying you're not sure which generation you're in, click here. And then that brings you to a page that talks about the generations and how different generations are interacting with your charity.
yeah,
It doesn't mean that they have to interact that way, but you might be able to say that we're finding many people in Gen Z really love to do, this, or like to engage with us in this platform. So maybe
yeah.
that's just another way to have a conversation, is just to bring a little more content because they have asked the question, which generation am I in?
Yeah, simple registration links, simple pop-ups. When you
Right.
have to go through several clicks to get one answer or to submit something, it's not fun. And we currently live in an era where we're a current generation where we do things so quickly. We do 100 things in a day. It's not normal. It's probably not healthy either, but that's just what we're getting used to, right? And so anyone that opens any sort of pop-up and then there's 5 questionnaires afterwards
Right.
just to get to the thank you so much for your submission. I mean, it's annoying sometimes. I understand it's important information, but it's also information that you can gather on a more natural scale. So, for example, I think the most important investment that you can make is the human investment. That human interaction is still very valuable, and it may always be valuable. Doesn't matter what generation you're speaking to. It speaks volumes if you're with a donor or a prospect and you're trying to meet over coffee or have lunch with them, right? I think it's the best way to listen to their why, to their messaging, to know exactly what ask you can make with them as a
Mhm.
donor, right? To make sure that they feel like their efforts are impactful. But also remember that these are the generations that are looking forward to writing that novel on LinkedIn at the end of your coffee meet, right? They want to be able to take a picture. They want to share that professional, personal achievement. They want to get 200 likes on the Facebook post. And it all may seem so superficial. It may matter to some people and may not matter to you. That's okay too, right? But I think if you help your donor feel like they're going to be able to commit to a gift and then be able to write this heartfelt post after the fact, that's always going to be so much more important than any other investment that you can make into any technology or consultant or marketing team. But you do need to understand the steps to get there.
I did want to ask you about one thing you said earlier. It's just a technical piece, but it's the hashtags. And I thought that was so insightful because it's true. The way TikTok operates is one thing versus the way that Reels operates is totally another. So in one environment, the hashtag is all about, it's like the For You page. You're going to see the content that relates to, in theory, what you want or what it thinks you want. And that's why TikTok is so sticky. But Reels is a totally different thing, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how that translates into the world of LinkedIn, because you did make that differentiation and say that, there is a bit of a skewing younger, especially for TikTok, maybe for Reels, but when it comes to LinkedIn, it's more that professional network, if you want to call it that, and people are kind of clustered together and celebrating one another's, they're releasing a novel or whatever it is, like you just said. So do the devices like hashtags work the same way in that environment? How should we be thinking about the use of LinkedIn for particularly millennials?
It's really important because people, if you notice, people on LinkedIn are still using a bunch of hashtags, right? They'll hashtag anything and everything on their posts, which is fine, right? If there is an audience, there's always an audience, right? There's always an audience that is looking into hashtag management, hashtag fundraising, hashtag strategy,
Right.
whatever the hashtag may be. I don't think those hashtags are as interactive as we may think they are. The beauty in LinkedIn is that when you have a connection or a follower, your profile is public, right? They can see all your posts. They can see the things that you're reposting, the things that you're commenting on. And it allows you to understand that particular person. So they may be someone on your board, or they may be a donor, or they may be a prospect, or maybe you, right? It may be you. And knowing that people have access to you in that sense gives them a better understanding of who they're dealing with, right? You may, like I said, having coffee or lunch is always going to be super valuable with someone, but you never actually know what you're walking into. And I think LinkedIn gives you a really nice perspective into that individual. Um, and if you're using LinkedIn for posting videos, which are becoming much more popular on LinkedIn, if you're following hashtags, that's great, right? That's great because there are people taking time out of their days, their professional days, to create these posts that are meant to be insightful, that are meant to provide content for you to be more efficient and more productive. And so I'm not saying those hashtags are not important, right? I just don't think people are clicking on them the way they would be clicking on them on another platform such as TikTok.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you were moving towards that discussion about human interaction.
Yeah.
And maybe the differences in how that plays out for different generations. So I didn't mean to stop you from talking about that.
No, no,
What,
no.
that is the fundamental here. But I guess the question is how? So when you think about human interaction, because that's so effective, and you're thinking about Gen Z and millennials, what are the similarities and differences there? How can we engage with people at that human level so it doesn't seem like everything is produced by an AI, which is one of the dangers of tech, is that we can produce things with efficiency, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we produce them with heart.
No, it's a great way of looking at it. I think too, when you are, you're focused on this digital first fundraising, right? And what that means for you, right? Because what it means to you may be different from what it means from your colleagues and from other organizations. And that's okay to acknowledge and to accept, right? Not everyone's always going to be at the same scale. And there's a way for your organization as a whole, right, to engage on social media platforms. And then there's a way for you to engage with your donors and your prospects, your board members, your VIPs, your leadership teams, right? And assisting them to create content that's going to attract, their network. And that's very crucial to understand the differences, because I think for some people, for most people, from what I've heard, it just adds more work, right? Maybe you don't know all the ins and outs of social media, of TikTok and Instagram. And so to try to explain it to someone who probably already knows how to use it may seem a bit strange, right? But what you should be doing is giving them the ideas for their content, right? So if you're speaking to someone who's Gen Z, they already know how to use TikTok, they know how to use Instagram. Show them, give them examples, right? Talk to them about a way that they could create a reel or a video or a post, right? That's going to be impactful for whatever your cause is, right? Remember that this is a generation that's cause first, right? They want to make sure that their efforts are being seen. They love going viral. You don't have to be rich and famous to go viral. Everyone knows that at this point. And the power that a Gen Z's voice and post has over a millennials is becoming greater and greater every single day, right? And we see that the way that Gen Z is engaged with their technology on their phones, their tablets, their computers, is different from the way that millennials are, right? And millennials still take the time to read. They want to read a post, right? They want to receive an email. Gen Z, not so much. They want that 45-second reel, that second 61, or they want to be invited to a podcast, right? And so there's differences there. There are differences. And I don't think that as fundraisers or professionals, you need to kind of drown yourself in all of that and that know-how. Just simply understand it. Simply understand it to the point where you can advise your donors, right, in a way that their peer-to-peer fundraising is maximized to its fullest potential.
So I have a couple of questions on that. So one is about ambassadors. And I don't know if you refer to them as that, but social ambassadors. But when you just talked about not prescribing what people do or doing it for them, but giving them maybe some tools,
yeah,
or some suggestions as to how they could be talking about the causes that are closest to their heart. And hopefully our organization is one of those causes. What can you give us an example of how you've seen an organization, perhaps one you've worked with, or it can be another, of how people have coached or provided information to people who could act as social ambassadors on the platforms that made sense for them and for their cohort?
Yeah, absolutely. So things to remember, again, if you're specifically talking to someone who's Gen Z, they're already going to know how to use the platform, right? They're going to know the basics of like editing a video, putting in the right filters, that you don't have to worry about, right? Um, if you're speaking to a millennial or anyone older than that, it might be a bit more of a detailed conversation, which is okay. Not always, right? Some people are pros at it. Um, but things that you should do, right? At least provide them with the basics, right? Provide them with the most important facts of the organization, but not always things that people can just find on Google or on your website, right? Provide them with information that is going to have some sort of emotional response, right? You want people to care. There's so many things to care about. And we sadly are in a generation where people care about something for 2 days and then they move on to the next trend or the next tragedy or whatever's happening, right? So the content that you need to provide your marketing team or your donor for their next post, right? It can be simple. You don't have to spend too much time or money on it, right? Be something simple that allows them to create something that is emotionally impactful, right? That resonates with their friends and family, not yours, right? Your friends and family are different. Give them something that resonates with their friends and family. Know what their why is, right? Why they're an ambassador to begin with, like why they care. If they have support from their spouse or their family or their children, why? Right? These are questions that you should ask, right? And your conversations with them.
Now, I know that one of the things that you wanted to talk about today, if you had time, was about this concept of the subscription generation. Can you
Yeah.
introduce that concept, but also how it plays out again for the different generations?
I don't even know if it's just Gen Z and Millennials that are subscription generations. I think everyone is a subscription. We are in a subscription generation now.
Okay, so what does that mean? What
You know what I mean? We're all paying for something. We're paying for Netflix or Spotify,
Mhm.
right? I don't know if I've been to a house recently where people just have cable, but they have 10 different apps that they're paying for.
They've all cut that cord, right? Long ago.
And they're used to it and they're okay with it. People don't even know what is like automatically taken out of their bank account anymore. They just know that they're going to be charged 7, 8, 10 bucks for something, and they're okay with it.
And that's okay for across the generations, you're saying. So whether it's a monthly giving program that's all digital based on a credit card, or whether it's Apple Pay or whatever it is, whether they're 22 or they're 52.
Yeah, I think it's just the part, there's a shift. There's a digital shift that's happening in every generation. Obviously, millennials started, Gen Z is running it type of thing.
Right.
And everything is essentially going to move into a more digital aspect, a more digital platform. And we're seeing that at a very rapid rate. We're seeing that with monthly giving programs within the nonprofit space, but we're also seeing it within, monthly subscriptions that people have for their own personal uses, podcasts, books, and all sorts of things, right?
Right.
But in this era where sustainable programs could actually lead to major efforts for nonprofits in a very positive way. All right. But the downside of that is that it's not going to last forever. People care.
Okay. No, but a lot of people may not even have a sustainer program. So if you don't mind, Genesis, I just want to ask again, people in the crowd, do
Yeah.
you have a sustainer program, a monthly giving program, a subscription program, something akin to that? We'd love to know, because some places do monthly giving because they see that connection like you're just making
Mhm.
between sustained giving and then the opportunity for major and planned gifts. But others who don't have that program, maybe they don't have that argument yet. So while people are answering that question, why is it that monthly giving or sustaining giving can potentially lead to these larger gifts?
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between a sustainable program and sustaining giving programs too, because a lot of people will have like some sort of membership program or some sort of subscription to their media, but they're not giving. And sometimes the teams don't have the bandwidth to take those lists of members and also make them potential prospects. They're like, that's just like a separate list and I don't have time for it. Lost loss of opportunities there. But um in these changes that are happening so quickly, right? So sustainer programs for giving, right? These younger generations are quick to lose interest, and that's the honest reality. But they're great for building coalitions and building movements, right? The thing is, they don't last very long. They're going to last maybe 2 years, and then they're going to move on. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the era that we're living in, right? They have access now. Social media is allowing individuals access to so much information that you and I did not have 10, 15 years ago, right? And so it's not that they don't care about your mission anymore. They just are understanding that there is so much that they want to be a part of, and that's okay too, right? They're innovators in the moment, but they don't wish to stick around for those 10, 20 plus year relationships that we normally see in older generations with nonprofits. So whether, you know, that is to a nonprofit or even in their career space, I mean, how many younger people do you see sticking around for 10 years at the same place
Right.
today?
Right. Well, we do have some people who are operating these programs, I think, because they understand that even if they are a limited time window, 2 years of sustained giving is better than a single gift, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it definitely builds trust potentially towards a major gift. But I have to ask you the unanswerable question. So what we're experiencing right now, right? If younger folks are in it for 2 years, like you said, just I know you're just giving an example, and then they move on to other things because there's so much that they can do and so many things that need to be addressed. Is that a function of this generation or our time? In other words, as this cohort goes from their 20s to their 50s, are they still going to be thinking as kind of a short attention span donor, where they only want to give for a year or two and then they move on? Or do you think that they're going to be more like today's boomers and late stage millennials?
I think they're going to be quick to move on. I don't think we would have seen that just from the trends that we've known that we're studying from the past 5, 6 years. I don't think we would have ever pictured our current generation having such a short attention span.
And that won't
Again,
change no matter how old they are.
not necessarily mattering how old they are, and
Right.
it is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just something that needs to be said and acknowledged, right?
Yep.
And so because of that quick shift in interest,
Mhm.
I think the best piece of advice to give people is that you need to be quick. You need to be quick to learn how to use a new piece of technology. You need to be quick to learn new strategies, and you need to be quick about making your ask.
Okay.
Right. And then I think that's just something that people are not used to. That's not something that's taught to us as fundraisers, as gift officers. Um, we're told to take our time to steward relationships, to be with them for a year before making the bigger ask.
Could be 24, 36 months before a big ask. Yeah,
Exact-
absolutely. And now you're saying no, accelerate, not because we need the money faster, but because the expectation of the donor is different.
Yeah. Yeah. The expectation of the donor is different. And some donors are going to come to you out of the blue, right? You're always going to get those unexpected donors that had something terrible happen in their life. And so now they're looking for a place to donate and making sure that doesn't happen again to any other family.
Right.
And those are always great. But again, that's quick. Things moved quickly on their end, and they weren't looking to donate before, but they're looking to donate now, right? So how do you quickly move, right, on donors like that?
Right. Well, that brings us to maybe this emerging tech piece, which we promoted as we were talking about the session with folks, whether it's
Speaking about
crypto
being quick.
or all these other things. So yeah, I want to jump into that because there are not only emerging technologies, but the way emerging kind of cultural shifts that are affecting how we interact with organizations. You were just talking about it right now. What are some of the things that you see as ways to effectuate what you were just describing, to act fast? What's the tech that lets us help donors to get in there faster and do what they want faster?
Right. Back on the topic of, we're focused on Gen Z and millennials, and we want to act quickly, right?
Right.
My question to the audience is going to be, have you even had the time to really look into crypto and what that means in philanthropy, right? There's an entire generation of people on the younger scale, right, that are using blockchains, right? They're understanding, they're studying crypto, they're studying digital currencies, right? And we need to understand for the nonprofit space, whether that's a real giving opportunity, right? Or if it's just complete hype, or if it's a scam, or whatever you may want to think about. You know, younger generations, they're using blockchain technologies, right? Even though it is so obvious every single day that the crypto markets fluctuate, right? But at the same time, this is a new trend that offers a new way for charities to connect with these more tech savvy donors, which we understand are younger generations, and potentially tap into larger gifts, right? People that are in the crypto world aren't necessarily moving around $5, right? That's just not what they're doing.
Right.
And so it may seem like a huge shift in the way that we're moving money and the way that we're asking for money and the way that money is being donated. But I don't think it should be acknowledged as just like a passing trend, right? The truth is that it is a real giving opportunity, but you can't jump into it blindly, right? You can't jump into it just saying, oh, I've heard of crypto, or I see that Bitcoin is really high. The truth is that many people make it seem very simple, right? But there's a lot of complexities behind it. And you don't want to lose risking money, at least not more than necessary in that process.
Yeah, I just have to say, so we have someone in the chat who just said crypto is the new stock market, and whether or not people believe that, or as you said, whether or not that it's real or it's not, the reality is people are making gifts of crypto. So to be aware of it, it's pretty important for nonprofits, right? I mean, we at least need to be aware that
Yeah, I
people
mean,
want to make gifts that way.
the younger generations know that, which is why they're ahead. It's why they're becoming millionaires at a speed that we've never seen before, right? And just the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen the world shift into digital currency. And it's one of those things that you don't have to necessarily move into now, but you have to start learning about it now, right? Because otherwise, in the next 10 years, it's going to be in your face, right? And you're going to lose valuable opportunities with your donor base if you don't know how to use it, right? So speaking on a personal and professional level, right? Like I don't think in 10 years little kids are going to be counting coins. Like coins are just not going to be existent, right? Like they're going to know how to use Apple Pay. That's what they're going to know. And so, I think the biggest scare that people have, are they scams? Sure. Scams are always around, but scams are also around with real US dollars, right? You're just learning to weave them out in a different territory, in this digital territory.
And we do have a question about what's the best way to learn about it. And I think that Marianne probably is talking about crypto. I can say that we've had someone from the Giving Block in the series before, so that's one way to do it. But do you have other suggestions, Genesis, for just learning about this? Or maybe organizations that are talking about crypto, so that's a model for how we could do it in our own organizational contexts?
Yeah, it's a great segue. The Giving Block is great, and they're also, I mean, they're great for facilitating crypto within the philanthropic space. For those that don't know what Giving Block is, but the platform itself is really designed for nonprofits to accept donations in the form of crypto, but also stocks and DAFs is also huge, right? So they're really helping to kind of bridge that gap between the digital currencies and the more traditional ways of fundraising. But they will do it in a way that I think, and Jay, you've met with them before. I think they have a very good established presence, and think they're very focused on security and transparency. Transparency being something that our current generation is just so focused on. That's a huge value. Knowing that they're again, the transparency of conversations, that their dollars are going to what they say they're going to, that they're actually making an impact in their community, et cetera, right? So that's really important to know. I think if you go on the Giving Block website, they have an entire, it's almost like an annual report of the nonprofits that have been involved, and the millions of dollars that have been moved through their specific platform. I think cryptocurrencies are certainly very popular amongst the younger generations, although it's interesting because the older generations, millennials and above, those that have been more established in their careers, right, that actually have wealth, at this point, wealth to invest and wealth to convert, they're certainly interested, right? But they're not moving it as quickly as Gen Z is, which is, again, something very crazy to even say out loud. But be open to it. Be open to learning about these digital assets. I think nonprofits can certainly can learn from that. And I'm not going to get, because of time, I'm not going to get into the complexities of board approvals and accountant stuff and education. There's always going to be a downside of things, but I do think that that it is something worthwhile for nonprofits to start looking at sooner rather than later, because they will be left behind in the process.
And you're right, we are coming to the close of this. I know we're just scratching the surface, but you've touched on a couple of things maybe we can highlight as we close out. And one is, you talked about LinkedIn profiles. So maybe Jack, who's our producer here, in the background, could include our LinkedIn profiles so you can see where you can find out more about Genesis and her work. He can also include mine, and if he wants, he can include his own, so you can see what we're posting about, which includes conversations like this one. And Genesis also, of course, you alluded to DonorSearch, which is the professional hat that you wear by day when you're not wearing your cape by night. So when it comes to that work, how can people reach out to you there? What's the best way to learn more about your work at DonorSearch?
No, absolutely. I think DonorSearch is such a great open space that any way that you choose to reach out to us, whether that's via our website, our chat, or directly via email, is great. To set up a time or meeting with me, just my first name dot my last name at donorsearch.net. If not, connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me a message, and we can take it from there.
Okay, we'll make sure that's put in the chat as well. And just a couple of other notes. Not only do we have some interesting topics coming up in the week ahead, but we have the PM podcast where we tackle some of these issues. So you're going to find that very interesting. That's wherever you like to listen. That's the PM podcast. But you can also check that out on the DonorSearch site under the resources tab or on their YouTube channel. And next week, for those who are following the news in the social sector, our program Frontlines of Social Good is going to be discussing funding for public broadcasting, which, if you are following the news or if you listen to NPR or PBS, has been zeroed out from the federal government. And the question is, will they be able to claw that money back or not? You can find out more about that when we have the head of CPB talking to us on Tuesday at 1 p.m., along with the CEO and a board member of the World Health Organization Foundation, a global entity, which, of course, also has received the X from federal funding here in the United States. They'll have a lot to talk about in terms of what they're doing around the world. You can be there for all of that. That's on Tuesday at 1. And there are also other sessions in this series, once again, at the DonorSearch site and on the YouTube channel, tackling some of these issues like crypto, which Genesis has been sharing with us today, and other things, including the way that we generate some of our short videos using tools like Opus Clip and Arbor and others to take content like Genesis's discussion with us today and turning them into short form videos, which we then are posting to LinkedIn and to Reels and other platforms. If you're wondering how that's done and you want to know about any of that, feel free to reach out to me or Jack anytime. You can always contact me at j@donorsearch.net or by LinkedIn. So thank you, Genesis, so much for coming and sharing just a little thumbnail sketch of some of this today. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
And thanks to everybody who's here with us live. And for those who are watching this recording, feel free to share this with colleagues. This is an important topic, but most of all, we want to hear from you. And that means we have a little survey coming up. You don't have to fill out your full address. All you have to do is tell us what you thought and tell us maybe what you want to see in the future. It'll only take you about 10 seconds to do. So when you click to leave, make sure you fill that out if you would. We appreciate you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, take care.